Have you noticed, are you aware of how suicide is so much more intense these days, so much more frequent, more common, more, dare I say, normal than ever before? Well, today in this video, I want to talk a little bit about suicide, and particularly suicide with teens, with this younger generation, and why. Why has it become so prevalent part of our world? If you want to learn more, stick around. Hey, welcome back. I am Brett, your favorite shrink. And the other day, there was a report put out by the CDC, the Center for Disease Prevention. Center for Disease Control? I don't know what it means. But anyway, I'll look it up. Or somebody can put it in their notes, what they think the CDC is. But basically, the report came out and was talking about how the suicide rate with young adults or teens, preteens, has tripled over the last decade. Tripled. 3 times higher than ever before. Well, I threw it up on my Facebook post and I said, hey, why? What do you guys think? What do you think's happening with suicide? Because this is a problem. This is a serious, serious problem. People are dying. Children are dying. Well, the posts that came up were interesting. Some of them kind of were thinking the way I'm thinking. Some are along the line of how technology has changed us. And some other people were thinking about diet or about parenting. And I'm not sure I quite understood some of those posts. So if some of you are watching and you're thinking in those same lines, give me some feedback. I know I talked with my sister-in-law probably about a year ago, and we were talking about, why are the millennials the anxiety generation? What is that about? And one of her theories was that our gut, which we're starting to acknowledge is like a second brain to us because there's so many neurons down there in our gut. She was thinking that somehow the diet has changed for this generation. And maybe that's what's contributing to our increased depression or increased anxiety. And maybe somebody can explain that to me in a little bit more detail because I don't quite understand it. I grew up eating Hostess Twinkies, Suzy Q's. My diet was TV dinners, which were these really crappy, high-processed dinners set in these tinfoil dishes. They were set in tinfoil dishes because this is how old I am. Back then, we didn't even use our microwaves, didn't even have microwaves. That was a new thing, and we would stick them in the oven. So, crappy food? That's been around forever. I grew up on McDonald's. I grew up on crap food. So I'm not sure what's changed because that was like 40 years ago that I grew up on crappy food. But here, this new generation is struggling with more depression, more anxiety than ever before. So I'm not exactly sure how diet plays into that. So if somebody could put some comments in here, help me understand that a little bit better, I'd love to hear that. Some of the other comments I heard were about parenting. The parents are just not good parents these days. And maybe that's true. Maybe our parenting has become much more laxed. A while back, we would talk about how every kid got a trophy when they went to sports. And maybe somehow by giving every kid a trophy that we've created this generation of anxiety. Again, I'm not sure how I see that connecting. I do think that we're much more positive with our children than generations past. Generations past, it was pretty much kids were seen but not heard. You just didn't talk, you didn't interact. Parents were much more strict, using sticks and rods and rulers, whacking them. I think that we're much more humane as parents than we were before. And maybe, yeah, maybe the pendulum swung a little bit too far the other way. And maybe we're a little bit more indulgent. Maybe. But again, I'm not sure how that's translated into the depression and anxiety that we're seeing in these generations. So again, if you're in that camp or that school, give me some comments. I want to hear about what you're thinking in terms of our parenting has changed. Where I've seen the greatest change, and intuitively you also know has been the greatest change in this last generation, has been in media. It's our screens, it's our phones, it's access to this thing that has been the biggest change. And I also wonder if this is why this has changed our brain. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think it's changed our brain and how I see developmentally this generation isn't really getting what they need. So to unpack all that, let me back up a stage. I believe that you and we have 7 developmental needs. And if you want to learn more about the 7s, check it out on our website, gatheringofgoodpeople.com. It should be under content or courses, or both. And in these 7 developmental needs that we have, the first 3 are psychological. And the first 3 span our kind of our youth and our development, our early developmental years. And the first 3 core psychological needs are 1, safety. When a baby is born, it goes from a place of total safety inside the womb of its mother to a world that's bright and cold and disconnected, really. Your child is disconnected instantaneously from you. And that instantly throws it in a world of unsafe. So the first few years of a child's growth and development, safety is its primary issue. And the way it feels safe is to feel connected, to feel bonded. As a child feels safe, then it starts moving into its next developmental stage. The next developmental stage for any child is usually between 3 to about 10. And that, to me, is the stage of enough, feeling enough, being enough. And really, in a primitive thinking of a child, it's having enough. In those time periods between 3 to 10, a child is all about their stuff. What toys, things that they have, they become really attached to possessions. And in that psychological way, they measure their worth by the things that they have. Do I have enough? Am I enough? And that's where kids will have tantrums in the middle of the store. That's where kids will feel like they're dying if you say no, you can't get on your screen. You can't play your video game. It's like you took a knife and you jabbed it in their heart. Oh my gosh, they're going to freak out because that is their life. Those things are what they connect to. That's where the bond moves from to the things and possessions around them. Now, as we move into 11 to 19, which is the last third developmental stage in children's growth, what are we looking at is completely different. What we're looking at in that stage is, am I loved? Am I lovable? Not, do I have enough? Am I enough? Am I enough stuff? Or not even that core issue of safety. Now it's all about relationships. And what's interesting is it's not necessarily the relationships kids have with their parents. And so even though parents can be crappy parents in the sense that maybe they're overindulgent, kids aren't really interested in their relationships with their parents in that stage. In the stage 11 and 19, they're interested in their relationships with their peers. They're interested in the relationship with the rest of the world. And the core question that's going on in their mind in that developmental stage is, am I loved? And that personalizes to, am I lovable? And that's what they're looking at. Well, what's happening in that stage for those children? What's happening in that critical phase of their life from 11 to 19? They're getting more and more into media, into the electronic age, into not having real relationships with real people, but more into having texting relationships, more having calls and messaging and social networks, Instagram and Twitter. Those are the kind of relationships they start to develop more and more. I think that's the key difference. If we're going to look at where this generation is different, it's in media. And again, I'm in a different generation, but I think my story really illustrates what I'm talking about. When I grew up, Mom left early on when I was just a little kid, and Dad worked 3 jobs to provide for the family, to take care of everything. So pretty much me and my siblings, we raised ourselves. We didn't have parents. For a short period of time, Dad tried to do nannies. We chased them out. I think we chased them out before I was even in 4th grade. And then from 4th grade on, it was just on your own. And at that point, I call it the one-eyed babysitter. The one-eyed babysitter was my nanny, was my parent. Because I would sit and log hours and hours and hours, because I was completely unsupervised, on TV. And I'd watch show after show after show after show. I think at one point, the Nelson company that does the ratings back in the day, maybe they still do it today, they sent us a survey to ask, how much TV do you watch? What do you watch? They had to do all the Nielsen ratings based on paper surveys in the mail. These are the old days, right? And I remember filling one out and thinking, man, I watch 8 to 10 hours of TV every day. That can't be right, can it? So I was very much a screen-raised child. And I didn't socialize much with the neighbors around me. There was Ian Miller up the street, who was probably a good friend because he was a bit dorky and geeky like I was. He was from Canada and nobody knew Canadians, so he was kind of ostracized because he looked different, talked different, dressed different. And so since I was a geek, not even a geek, that's not even the right word back then, nerd or weird, him and I would play, hang out, things like that. But I had really, beyond Ian, maybe, I didn't have really very many friends at all. And I lived a pretty isolated life. As a result, I had tons of anxiety. I had depression off of the chart. And again, I think that was there because I didn't have that developmental need met. I didn't see myself as loved. I didn't see myself as lovable. And I think that's really what's going on. When you look at the children today and you ask them about how they see themselves, do they see themselves as loved? Do they see themselves as lovable? No. And in fact, one of the number one triggers for suicide and suicidality is their social relationships. Oftentimes, it's right on the heels of a breakup that a child becomes suicidal. It is the number one reason. If a child leaves a suicide note or a child talks to people about why they're feeling suicidal, it always has to do with their relationships, with their connections in the world. You don't see kids suicidal who have good relationships. They feel like their peers really understand them. They feel really well connected with their peers. That is not the way it works. The number one reason for feeling suicidal is because they feel isolated. They feel alone. They feel like they're not understood. They feel like in their peer groups they wear a mask. But anything beyond that mask, they feel like their peers don't understand them. They feel like their family doesn't understand them, that doesn't get them. That is the number one, by far, reason why people are committing suicide. It's not because they're feeling like they don't have enough things. Oh, I didn't get the new Xbox, or oh, I don't have the new iPhone, or it's not the possessions that people will list off feeling like, oh, my life's unfair and my life's terrible because I don't have this possession or this thing. No, that's not what makes us suicidal. What makes us suicidal, what makes this generation so anxious and depressed is the lack of relationships, the lack of connection. Because the connections that we have are superficial. They're these electronics. They're not deep. They're not meaningful. They're not significant. Nobody really feels like, not nobody, but a lot of kids these days don't really feel like anybody really gets them, really understands them. And it's that lack of intimate connection with people. That's where the hole is. And it comes in that developmental stage between 11 and 19. Now, as we grow beyond that stage, we can clock the years. We can be 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. But I really believe that if those early phases for you and for me aren't met, they haven't really been resolved, we can be 60 years old and still feel disconnected and not really be able to move into those more advanced developmental stages because we're still stuck in those basic stages, still stuck in feeling unloved or unlovable. And I believe that is what's going on. So the answer, we need connection. We need relationships. We need interactions. We need to have a place, a safe place where we can be real with each other. We can take off the mask, the superficial, the here's what people expect of me, and we can be genuine with each other and be connected with each other. And my hope is that we can even do that electronically. Not that electronics is evil or wicked or the core of the problem. I do think that the personal interactions are better. I do like writing with a pen or a pencil and paper better than typing on a computer. But the reality of our world, the reality of our generation is technology. And so I'm not going to suggest that we need to throw out technology to be able to correct this problem. But I am going to suggest that we need to use technology and create authentic relationships with people, a place that we can really, truly be honest. More than Instagram or more than Twitter or more than Facebook, we can create a place where we can be ourselves. And that's really what I want to create. That's what I'm hoping to create with this gathering. The gathering of good people is where we can come together and we can start interacting with each other in a way that's true. That you can be you. And in being yourself and finding connection with other people that are also authentic, we can fill that developmental need that's lacking, that's void, that's always drawing our attention and energy. We can fill it, we can give it what it's looking for, which then allows us to move on to other more advanced developmental needs, namely learning to love others truly, honestly. You can't do that if you feel unloved and unlovable. So we need to learn to love others. And then another one even beyond that is learning how to truly love yourself, filling your own love needs. But we can't get to those higher ones unless we get the base one done. So I want to encourage you, join the gathering of good people at thegatheringofgoodpeople.com. And let's see if we can start a real community with real people, with real feelings, with real authenticity in who we are with each other, and create the connections that we need. Thanks for, again, watching. I'm Brett, your favorite shrink, and we're watching a gathering, or we're on a gathering of good people. Take care.